The bell at St. Hilda's Abbey tolled before dawn, a thin, trembling note swallowed by sea mist. From the cliffside, the water below looked like molten pewter, restless and waiting. Inside the chapel, 23 sisters knelt on cold flagstones, their voices threading Latin prayers through the echoing dark. The smell of wax and salt hung heavy. Outside, gulls wheeled against the sky. Sister Elfgifu, youngest of them all, lifted her eyes toward the cracked fresco above the altar, saints with faces faded by years of sea wind and candle smoke. Each painted hand seemed to gesture toward the horizon, warning of something unseen. Mother Sinuin, the abbess, stood at the chancel step holding a silver cross older than any of them. Its edges were dented, its chain blackened by centuries of touch. Her voice was steady, almost tender. "If the sea takes our walls," she said, "keep your vows where they cannot reach. Here." She pressed a hand over her chest. Faith must live inside the ruin. From beyond the cliff came a sound that didn't belong to morning. A horn, long and low, carried through the fog like a wound. It came again, closer. The gulls scattered. The tide rolled crimson under the sunrise. Elfgifu froze mid-prayer. Another sound followed, oars striking water in rhythm, deep and heavy. Then shouting. The sea gave no warning, only a red horizon and the thunder of horns. "Vikings," one sister whispered. There had been rumors for months. Villages burned along the Humber, monks butchered at Lindisfarne, the north coast turned to ash. But St. Hilda's stood alone on a high headland, surrounded by cliffs and thorned heath. They believed distance would save them. Now, as the horns split the mist, even the air seemed to doubt. No beacon fires answered from the inland hills. No riders came from the royal road. Only the wind, restless with smoke. The abbey doors slammed as brothers from the lay order rushed in. "Ships!" one cried, at least 10. Behind him, the sea roared like a living beast. Mother Sinuin met his gaze, then turned to her sisters. "If we cannot flee," she said softly, "we will stand." They moved quickly, trained by years of discipline. Elfgifu gathered the relics, a chalice of beaten silver, a carved wooden crucifix, scraps of parchment inked with psalms, and carried them to the altar's hollow base. She placed each object carefully, whispering a prayer over every touch. If their bodies failed, perhaps the faith would remain. The first arrows struck the shutters like hail. Then came the crash of iron against wood, the gate breaking. The Vikings did not waste steel on holy walls. They used fire. Smoke curled through the cloisters, black and bitter. Candles wavered, and the hymn that had begun as prayer rose now as defiance. Te lucis ante terminum. Before the ending of the day. The doors burst inward. Men in furs and iron, faces smeared with ash, poured through the nave. Their boots cracked the floor tiles. One tore the crucifix from the wall, laughing as it fell. Another seized a manuscript, held it to the fire, and watched the ink curl. Elfgifu clutched her rosary until the beads cut her skin. Around her, sisters screamed, others prayed louder. Through the smoke, she saw the abbess still standing at the altar, cross in hand, unmoving. When the leader entered, tall, scarred, his cloak pinned with a silver wolf, the room fell to a strange silence. He studied them the way hunters study a new animal. "White women," he said in rough Mercian, "wives of your god." His men laughed. He pointed at the chalice on the altar. "Gold?" "Silver," Mother Sinuin said. "Then you keep it for him?" "For his blood." The Viking grinned. "Then he bleeds as we do." He struck the chalice to the ground. No one moved. No one wept. That stillness unsettled him more than cries. "Take them," he said at last. "The sea wants no dead weight." By nightfall, St. Hilda's burned. The relics hidden beneath the altar glowed faintly through the stones, the last heartbeat of the Abbey. The bell tower collapsed, its bell melting into a red lake that hissed against the sea wind. In the courtyard, the surviving sisters were bound with ropes cut from ship rigging. Torchlight turned their white habits to shifting gold and shadow. Ash clung to their faces like soot paint. The Viking leader watched them as one might admire a captured relic. "Your god sleeps now," he said. "You will wake in his place." Elfgifu looked up, meeting his gaze. "He does not sleep," she whispered. "He waits." Her voice was low but sure. When he raised his axe, she did not flinch. Something in that calm made him pause, just long enough for another sound to fill the courtyard. A voice, thin but steady, singing. It was Sister Winfrith, oldest of them, her throat raw from smoke. She began to chant Agnus Dei. One by one, the others joined her until the air quivered with the sound. The Vikings hesitated. Some smirked, others looked uneasy, as if the song itself carried a curse. The leader barked for silence, but none came. The nuns sang louder. They sang not of mercy, but of endurance, not of heaven, but of the courage to meet what waited. By the time the flames reached the chapel roof, the hymn had become something else, a wall no sword could breach. The Viking lowered his axe. "They live," he said. "For now." At dawn, smoke drifted from the ruins across the sea. The ships waited below, their sails painted red with pitch. Bound in pairs, the sisters were driven down the narrow path to the beach. The wind tugged their veils, the ash burned their feet, but their heads remained high. They were no longer praying for rescue. They were walking into legend. Elfgifu turned once toward the cliffs, where the bell tower had stood. Through the haze, she thought she saw movement, light glinting where no flame should be. Perhaps it was imagination, perhaps not. As the Vikings pushed them onto the longships, she whispered to the abbess, "Will they kill us?" Mother Sinuin shook her head. "No," she said softly. "They will do something worse." The oars struck the water. The abbey vanished behind smoke and distance. And so began the long passage north, to Jorvik, to the halls where faith would be broken and reborn, to the silence that history still calls the Song of the Northern Sisters. The long ship heaved against the tide like an animal straining at its leash. Salt burned in every cut the ropes had made on Elfgifu's wrists. The sea was no longer gray, but black, streaked with ash from the abbey's pyre. Around her, the other sisters swayed in silence, bound in pairs along the oar bench. Wind caught their veils and tore them ragged. The cloth fluttered like tattered wings. Above, the Vikings laughed. They drank from horn cups, their voices rough as gravel, their language a wall of sound. Now and then, one would glance down at the women and smirk, as if the sight of them were both victory and entertainment. Mother Sinuin sat at the prow, her face turned toward the horizon. Every few moments, she murmured something no one could hear. It might have been prayer. It might have been counting the waves until land. By dusk, the ships entered the estuary, where the Ouse widened toward the north. Smoke already rose ahead. Not battle, but settlement. Jorvik. The Norse had renamed it, just as they renamed everything they claimed: rivers, fields, even gods. When they docked, the sisters were driven through narrow streets that smelled of fish and iron. Children ran alongside, laughing, pointing at their habits. Dogs barked. Every doorway held a watching face. Elfgifu had thought conquest would be loud, but this was worse. A quiet curiosity, as if the entire town leaned in to witness faith stripped bare. At the heart of the stronghold stood the longhouse of Eric Bloodhand, its roof beams carved with wolves and dragons. Torches lined the entrance. The smell of mead and roasted meat drifted out into the cold. Inside, benches circled a long fire pit. Dozens of warriors crowded the hall, their armor glinting in the flicker of flame. Eirik sat at the high seat, a cloak of bear hide around his shoulders, a silver arm ring heavy on one wrist. His eyes were pale, the color of a frozen river. And when he smiled, it looked more like a wound reopening. "Bring the women forward," he said. They were herded into the center of the hall. The noise dimmed. Firelight painted their faces gold in shadow. Elfgifu counted 13 of them still standing. The others, she did not know. Eirik lifted a cup. "You served the White Christ," he said in rough but clear English. "He did not serve you. Now you serve me." A roar of laughter answered him. Someone slammed a shield. Another spat ale onto the floor. He gestured toward a bound crucifix one of his men had stolen from the Abbey. It leaned against the wall, its surface blackened with smoke. "Sing to your God," he said. "Let us hear if he listens." No one moved. The silence felt heavier than chains. A warrior stepped forward, seized the crucifix, and dragged it across the floor. "Sing," he sneered, "or I'll teach you another kind of prayer." Elfgifu's heart pounded. She looked at the abbess, who said nothing, only met her gaze and nodded once. That was enough. Elfgifu stepped forward. Her voice shook at first and then steadied. "Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata mundi, miserere nobis." The hall quieted. One by one, the other sisters joined her until the sound rose through the rafters, soft, trembling, but impossible to ignore. The Vikings watched, uncertain whether to mock or marvel. The hymn floated above them, fragile yet unbroken, and for a heartbeat, even Eirik lowered his cup. When the final note faded, the silence that followed felt like judgment. Eirik leaned forward. "Pretty ghosts," he murmured. "But ghosts obey the living." He rose and struck the crucifix with his boot. The figure splintered. "You will sing when I tell you. You will eat when I command. And you will live because I allow it." He turned to his men. "Take them below. Let them learn the dark before they earn the light." They were pushed down a narrow passage behind the hall into a damp chamber that stank of seaweed and smoke. There were no windows, only a slit of moonlight through the floorboards. Rats moved along the walls. A single bucket served as water and confession alike. When the door closed, the sound of laughter above resumed, louder, crueler. Hours passed, the sisters huddled together for warmth. Elfgifu's throat ached from salt and smoke. Somewhere beyond the wall, she heard a harp, delicate notes threading through drunken song. For a moment, she thought she heard their hymn again, reshaped into something coarse. She whispered, "They're playing it." Mother Sinowin's eyes opened in the dark. "Then let them," she said. "They can steal the tune, not the meaning." It was a small sentence, but it steadied them all. The next day, guards brought stale bread and a bucket of water. When Elfgifu reached for it, one guard smirked and poured half onto the floor. "Your God drinks first," he said. The other laughed. Elfgifu met his eyes and replied, quiet as stone. "He already has." He stared at her, uncertain whether to strike or walk away. He did neither. That night, the laughter above grew until the beams shook. A feast was underway. The smell of roasted meat drifted down through the cracks. The sisters tried to pray, but the noise drowned every word. Then a new sound reached them. The slow thump of feet, the scrape of benches moved aside. A door opened. Torchlight slashed the darkness. Eirik stood there, his shadow stretching across the floor. "Come," he said. "All of you." They followed, barefoot and trembling, back into the hall. The fire pit still glowed red. The warriors had cleared space for a spectacle. Eirik pointed to Elfgifu. "Sing again." Her voice was gone. Smoke had burned her throat. He raised an eyebrow. "No voice? Then pray. Show your God to us." She closed her eyes, and when she spoke, it was not a prayer but a vow. "We will speak only when he listens." A murmur ran through the hall. Eric's amusement faded into something colder. He waved his hand. "Lock them below. Let silence teach them obedience." As the sisters were led away, Elfgifu looked once more at the broken crucifix. Its head was missing. The nails still clung to the beam. She thought of the sea, how it kept no graves, only echoes. Down in the darkness again, she whispered to the others, "They think silence will break us." Mother Sinuin answered, "Then let silence be our prayer." Above them, the feast raged on. The laughter, the clatter, the songs that mocked the very words they once sang. But beneath the longhouse, a different music began. The rhythm of whispered psalms, the soft scrape of fingernails carving tiny crosses into the stone. They sang without sound now, their faith folding inward, hidden but alive. And so the first night in Jorvik ended. Not with screams, but with silence. The kind that waits, patient as the sea for the next storm to come, days blurred like candle smoke. No one counted them aloud. In the dark beneath the longhouse, time moved only by the crack of boots on the floor above, or the scrape of a bucket against stone. The air was damp and sour with the smell of earth and salt. The sisters whispered psalms into their sleeves, soft enough that even God would have to lean close to hear. Elfgifu's hands were raw. Her task was to fetch water from a barrel that leaked. Others scrubbed weapons, folded furs, or stoked fires they were forbidden to warm their own fingers by. The Norse called it service. To the sisters, it was a ritual of endurance. Sometimes the guards threw scraps of meat onto the floor, laughing as the women ignored them. Other times they spat curses in half-broken English. Christ's widows, dirt eaters, ghosts. When the door opened one morning, the light stabbed her eyes. A man stepped inside, not a warrior, not like the others. His tunic was dark wool, his beard streaked with gray. Around his neck hung a small pendant shaped like a hammer. "I am Halvard," he said in their tongue, his accent careful, almost scholarly. "A priest of our gods. Eirik has sent me to see why you do not speak." No one answered. He crouched near the fire pit, studying them as though they were strange birds. "You think silence will make you strong," he said. "But silence is a cage that rusts from within." Elfgifu lifted her eyes. "Then why come into it?" For a moment he seemed startled. He smiled, but not unkindly. "To learn what holds it together." That night he returned with bread and water. "Not from Eirik," he said when they hesitated. "From me." He sat by the wall, listening as they whispered prayers too faint to understand. When Elfgifu met his gaze, she saw not cruelty but curiosity, the dangerous kind that could turn mercy into blasphemy. In the days that followed, he came often. He asked about their god, their rites, their relics. He told them of Odin, who traded an eye for wisdom, and Frigg, who wept for sons fated to die. "Our gods demand strength," he said. "Yours seems to demand suffering." Elfgifu replied quietly, "Suffering reveals strength." "It is not the same," he frowned. "Strength should conquer, not endure." "Then why are you here?" she asked. He had no answer. Rumors spread through the longhouse. Some said the Norse priest had gone soft, others that he was bewitched by the foreign women. Once, a warrior spit at him as he passed. "You bring ghosts into our house," he growled. Halvard ignored him, but his visits grew shorter, his voice lower. Still, he brought what little he could: scraps of bread, a knife to cut rope, a candle stub. When he left, he would touch the wall, tracing one of the tiny crosses Elfgifu had carved there. The sisters had begun their secret scripture. Each cross marked a day survived. Each notch, a prayer left unsaid but not forgotten. By the end of winter, the stone walls were stippled with marks, hundreds of them. The guards called it madness. To Elfgifu, it was faith turned physical. One night, when the hall above thundered with laughter and drunken song, Halvard slipped into the chamber carrying a small lantern. His face was pale, his voice urgent. "They plan to send you north," he whispered, "to the slave markets beyond the sea." Mother Sinuan stirred. "Then this will be our pilgrimage." He shook his head. "You don't understand. Those who go do not come back." Elfgifu looked at him steadily. "Neither did your warriors who fell at our gates." He flinched, as if struck. "Why will you not beg to live?" "Because you think we haven't already died." Silence filled the space between them, heavy, electric. The flame of his lantern trembled. He turned to go, then paused. "There is a way out. A passage under the hall. It was dug long ago to drain flood water. It leads to the river." "Why tell us?" she asked. He hesitated. "Because even gods should not fear light." Before dawn, he was gone. The sisters found the tunnel days later, hidden behind a pile of timber and salt barrels. It stank of rot and stagnant water, but air moved faintly through it, a promise. They followed it as far as they dared before hearing footsteps above. They sealed it again, waiting for the time they would need it. When Eric discovered the carvings on the walls, he flew into rage. "Who did this?" he shouted, slamming his axe into the stone. "Who dares carve the mark of the dead?" No one answered. He turned to the guards. "Take one each day until they remember how to speak." That night they took Sister Winfrith, the oldest. She did not scream. She crossed herself once and whispered something Elfgifu couldn't hear. Then she was gone. By morning, the first cross on the wall had been rubbed smooth, a deliberate act of defiance. Eirik's men took another, and another. Yet each disappearance brought more marks, not fewer. Soon the walls glimmered with scratches that caught the torchlight like stars. Halvard returned once more. His eyes were hollow, his voice unsteady. "You will get them all killed." Elfgifu answered, "We are already beyond killing." He stared at her, at the dirt, the rags, the quiet fire in her eyes. And for a heartbeat, something inside him cracked. "If your God exists," he said softly, "he hides in madness." She smiled faintly. "Then that is where he will be found." After he left, the sisters prayed not for rescue but for remembrance. If no one came, the stone would bear witness. That night, Elfgifu traced one more cross, larger than the rest, and whispered, "When they cannot find our names, this will speak for us." Outside, winter broke. The river thawed. But beneath the longhouse, the air stayed cold. Preserved, like faith buried, but unrotted. And so their silence became the new hymn of Jorvik, a soundless rebellion echoing through wood and stone, waiting for the day it would rise again. The thaw came slowly that year. By the time the ice broke on the Ouse, half the town of Jorvik reeked of damp rot and smoke. Mud swallowed footprints before dawn, and the longhouse smelled of sweat, iron, and fear. The sisters in the cellar no longer measured time by sun or moon. They marked it by sound, the rhythm of the guards above, the drip of water through the floorboards, the breath of wind that found its way through the cracks. Elf Gifu had stopped trying to count the days. Numbers meant nothing when each hour was the same ache. Yet something had changed. The tunnel Halvard spoke of still whispered faint drafts through the stones, carrying the scent of river mud and distance. To her, it smelled like prayer. One evening, after the guards stumbled off drunk from the feast hall, Elf Gifu crept toward the far wall with Mother Sinowin and 3 others. They pushed aside the salt barrels and knelt by the stones. The air there felt cooler, alive. Together, they began to dig. The sound was faint, just the scrape of bone and wood against dirt. But to Elf Gifu, it felt deafening. Every shovelful was a heartbeat louder than courage. When at last the wall gave way, a thin breath of air brushed her face. Stale, but free. The passage beyond was narrow and half-flooded, carved long ago when this place was still a Saxon hall. They crawled through it on their hands and knees until the flicker of a dying candle revealed a small chamber, round and hollow, like the inside of a bell. The air was heavy with age. A few scraps of broken pottery littered the floor, and a single beam crossed the ceiling, blackened by old smoke. Mother Sinowin stood in the dim light, her voice steady though it trembled from cold. "This is where he has brought us," she said, "a church built from the bones of their sin." That night, the women cleaned the chamber with what they had. Torn habits for cloth, a broken jug for water. They carried down splinters of wood from the storage piles above, fashioned a rough cross, and set it against the wall. Elf Gifu lit their last candle and pressed it into a shard of pottery for a holder. The tiny flame wavered, trembling like faith itself. "If God cannot see us," she whispered, "we will make him hear us." From then on, the chamber became their chapel. Each night after the longhouse quieted, the sisters slipped into the tunnel to pray. They sang no hymns. Song might betray them. Instead, they prayed in silence, tracing invisible words in the air. Their lips moved like ghosts, speaking to a world that had forgotten their names. Days passed. The carvings on the cellar walls spread into the chapel itself, crosses, lines of Latin, even runes from the Norse alphabet that Halvard had once shown them. Elf Gifu began to mix them, their script and his, creating symbols no one living could read. To her, it was unity born from defiance, a secret language of the conquered and the conquerors both reaching for something greater than war. Whispers spread through the hall above. Servants spoke of strange sounds under the floor, breath, movement, a faint hum like the sea in a shell. Eric laughed it off. "Let the ghosts pray," he said. "They do no harm." But not all were so sure. One night, a young guard refused to go down with the water buckets, muttering that he'd heard chanting through the stones. Another swore he saw a flicker of light where there should have been none. Even Halvard kept his distance now. When he finally returned, his face was drawn tight with fear. "The town is sick," he told Elf Gifu. "The air stinks of death. They blame you." She looked at him calmly. "Do you?" He hesitated. "No, but I have seen how men fear what they cannot command. Eric says the gods are angry, that your silence curses his house." Mother Sinowin answered, "If silence curses him, it is only because he has filled the world with noise." That night, Halvard slipped a small clay lamp into Elf Gifu's hands. "If they come," he whispered, "go to your chapel. Bar the door. Do not answer." He turned to leave, but she caught his wrist. "Why help us still?" He stared at the flickering lamp. "Because if your God is real, he will remember I tried." Then he was gone. The sickness came with a thaw. Men who drank from the river began coughing blood. Children burned with fever. The markets emptied. Eric's laughter died in his throat. Smoke from the pyres hung over Jorvik like a second winter sky. And with every death, more eyes turned toward the longhouse and the women below. "They bring death," someone hissed. "Their god eats our souls." One night, footsteps thundered above. Torches flared through the cracks in the floorboards. Elf Gifu heard shouting. Irik's voice. The trapdoor creaked. She grabbed the lamp and motioned to the others. Together, they fled down the tunnel into the chapel. The last sister threw slammed the plank of wood across the opening. In the faint light, the crosses on the wall gleamed like wet silver. Outside, boots pounded. Someone shouted in Norse. Then a heavy stone scraped over the entrance. They were sealing it. Mother Sinuin knelt before the rough altar. Her breath came slow, steady. "If this is the end," she whispered, "let it be holy." The air thickened. Smoke seeped through the cracks. Elf Gifu clutched the lamp, its flame guttering, shrinking. Around her, the sisters clasped hands. No one wept. No one screamed. They began to hum, soft, wordless, rising from the throat like wind through reeds. The melody wound upward, trembling, radiant. The smoke filled the space, turning the flame to a halo. Elf Gifu raised her head. "They think silence will bury us," she said. "But silence is only the sound before God answers." The light went out. Above, the Vikings waited for the screams that never came. Instead, faint through the floor, came something stranger, a sound that seemed both too near and too far to be of this world. A hymn without words. For 3 days, the torches outside the longhouse burned without reason. The men who sealed the cellar swore they still heard voices through the stone. Not screams, not weeping, but a hum that trembled like wind beneath the earth. By the 4th night, it stopped. Eirik Bloodhand ordered the door bricked, the passage filled, and the ground salted. "Let their God sleep under us," he said, though his voice had lost its laughter. But the silence did not bring peace. It brought fear. Within a month, Jorvik began to rot from within. The plague took the children first, then the elders. The river filled with ash from the pyres. The same men who mocked the sisters now carved crosses on their doors, desperate for a mercy they'd once called weakness. Some whispered that the women's prayers had turned to wings, that their song carried the souls of the dying to whatever heaven waited beyond the smoke. At night, when the wind turned north, Eirik woke to faint echoes beneath the floorboards, a pattern, soft and rhythmic. He told himself it was wood shifting, the house settling. But the melody that threaded through the dark was too deliberate to be accident. Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata mundi. Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world. He tried to drink the sound away. It always returned. Years passed. The longhouse burned in another raid. A church rose on its ashes. Stone over timber. Prayer over conquest. The city grew. Norse over Saxon, market over grave. The world forgot the women buried below. But the ground never did. Centuries later, when archaeologists dug beneath the crypts of York Minster, they found a chamber no record mentioned. Inside lay a beam blackened by smoke, a clay lamp, and hundreds of carvings, crosses, Latin prayers, Norse runes twined together like roots. The air was cold, untouched for 1,000 years. On the far wall, half hidden by soot, a single phrase remained. Lux in tenebris lucet, the light shines in the darkness. It was then that history stopped calling it legend. The women of St. Hilda's had not simply vanished. They had transformed their prison into a chapel. Where faith was meant to end, it began again. Their bodies were taken by earth, their names erased by ink. But their faith, carved in stone, endured. What the Vikings did to them was worse than death. They stripped them of breath, voice, and name. Yet, in doing so, gave them eternity. Historians would call it tragedy. Believers would call it miracle. But somewhere between the two lies truth. The unkillable human need to be remembered. And today, when the winter wind moves through the cracks of York Minster, caretakers sometimes stop and listen. Beneath the hum of the pipes and the sigh of the stones, a faint sound rises. The echo of women singing to a God who never forgot their names. Maybe it's only the air. Or maybe it's what faith sounds like when it refuses to die. If this story found you, if the courage of Sister Elf Gifu and her sisters reached across time, let it stay with you tonight. Tell me what you felt when you heard what they endured. Because remembrance is all they ever wanted. And if you want to uncover more forgotten truths buried beneath the ruins of history, stories of faith, power, and the people the world tried to erase, stay with us. Subscribe, share, and step deeper into the shadows of time. Because some stories don't end where they're buried. They echo. And tonight, you've heard one.